remembering one of the first times we spent together. I feel like it was 4 or 5 years ago. We were playing together. I was playing with the Catalyst Quartet. We were doing a residency all over the Bay Area. You and I were squished together in the backseat of his car. And you were a violinist. And then you were like, I'm going to leave the quartet and focus a little bit more on composing. And then I turn around and you are like this really famous composer and 2023 Musical America Composer of the Year, which is a very big deal. And it just seems really fast.
That just seems so not that long ago, actually. It feels like, and yeah, so much has happened in that time. Incredibly fast. I mean, it was, things were sort of starting, the ball was rolling. That was sort of what inspired me to sort of make that life change of moving on from the quartet. And then over the past, 4 or 5 years, that momentum just snowballed, especially with the pandemic and the social sort of consciousness awareness that sort of opened up during that time.
So I feel like you're doing a lot of things to redefine, well, I don't know, redefine is a big word, to define for yourself what a composer can be. And this is all happening in a time when a lot of definitions are shifting. So I'm remembering when we spoke in, I want to say the summer or fall of 2020, and you were stepping into this really fast career growth at a time when there was, the post-George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, sudden shift in the industry and attention to artists of color and huge demand on you as a composer to be reactive to that moment, and you were not feeling great about it. Tell me how you've gone through this time, how you kind of found ways to protect your boundaries. Because I remember in that conversation, you said to me, my music is a lot about joy and a sense of play, and I don't want my music to be pushed into this, time of tragedy or to reflect these big, heavy issues. That's not me.
Yeah, no, it wasn't me, I would say, at that time. I mean, I have a tremendous respect for people responding however they need to respond. I mean, I was struggling with so many different things personally as well. And I think I was trying to deflect so much of it by attaching myself to that aspect of my work, that aspect of my music, which is free and playful. And I was sort of wanted to rebel against anything that was more intense. And I still feel like that sort of playful joyfulness is a value. It's a major value within my music. And it's not even about the music itself. It's about me. It's about me feeling freedom and lightness in my process, which is a lot to ask, to be honest. I mean, it's like composing is hard work. I think there's a way to still respond to the moment in a way that feels that still takes those values into consideration. But I do have a kind of rebellious streak where I'm like, well, whatever's going on over here, I'm going to do something completely different over here. Just for the sake of, just to keep it, fresh.
I want to ask you, because I know that these last couple of years have been really hard for you on the personal front. You lost your mom, and your mom was an artist who I think centered race in her work as a performance artist, as a writer, as a director, not to meet a moment, but as a constant. And I'm curious about how that has been a guide for you, again, to be not reactive, but present.
I took it for granted in a way. I mean, I learned everything about my identity, my Blackness from her. She would sit me down and we'd just talk, and I would observe conversations with colleagues. I would see her plays. I would, and I think there was still a part of me that was like, that's not what I'm gonna do or something. And I don't know if it was like not because it was about race, or it was just because she was my mom and I'm going to do something else. You know, that was her. That was like very separate from what I was. I was like growing up in New York City in this very metropolitan place. All the kids looked different, really diverse group. And I was studying classical music where there was like zero black people in the music. I mean, I was the only one.
Yeah.
And I never talked about my identity in the context of music until way later. I was grateful for and in extreme admiration of my mother. That aspect of like connecting one's identity to your life's work was just not in my purview. It wasn't even a part of, and interestingly, as over the past few years, as things have sort of changed, the expectations of classical music world even have changed. It sort of I've reconnected with that mainly through my colleagues and also studying more Black music, because I was like, there's this thing inside me that wants to come out and I want to put it in these big symphonies.
I feel like all of this is a question of identities.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, so there's composer, performer, frankly, still there's woman, there's woman of color. You said something about, you know, as a highly visible composer of color, trying to eliminate the fact that not all music by Black people is like rooted in jazz. I mean, there's this very complex blend of musical and personal identities.
Yep.
Which I guess all funnels into, you know, being composer of the year. And are you feeling like you're able to project these things, or, I mean, are you sneaking them in, or are you stating them? How does, yeah.
I have always been like purposefully non-deliberate about where my influence, like how things are gelling together. You know, I tell my story. I'm studying classical music. I grew up around a lot of different styles of music. I particularly free jazz, because that was kind of, and jam band stuff, because that was kind of like what my dad was into, and they would have rehearsals in my house all the time, stuff like that. And I feel like those things I just feel like it's almost like an equal pie for everything. And so I just, you know, when I'm just letting things flow, I'm like conscious that, I mean, I try to allow all of those things to kind of come to the center. I think, yeah, it is funny how people, I mean, they get stuck on the one thing. Like, have the amount of times I've at the end had excited audience members come up to me because they could hear the jazz, which is like, I'm like, yeah, there's probably a little jazz in there. It's true. You're right. But that was like the one thing that they wanted to attach to, you know. I think probably the female identity composer thing is more about representation than, because there's no music that is female sounding, right? That's gendered music is not a thing. However, Black music is a very concrete cultural identity. And so, you know, it's just interesting when people, you know, they group the category mainly on a sort of social, sort of a social political need to, you know, express that people are like woke and, you know, to keep me up with the times and everything, but they don't think about what it means in terms of the actual music itself and how the music functions. With all of that, that all sort of ended up, unfortunately, falling into the category of you're being put on task. It fell under like, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And so I've had to kind of grow into what some of the like actually positive aspects of this really are, and the sort of the true wishes of people that are like genuinely interested in seeing Black artists evolve and come through, and finding those people. But it's fun for me because then I get to work with all my friends.
Yeah.
So
I've been thinking so much about this question of collaboration and community. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's exactly 100 years ago, really, since the Harlem Renaissance, right? Which, by the way, nobody knew that's what it was until they were looking back.
Sure.
It didn't start
Yeah.
it just started. And it started for so many of the same reasons. It started because people were moving out of places where they were getting lynched. It started out of a pandemic. I mean, the circumstances were very much the same. And I think that going through this really hard and ugly and complicated time, and this kind of position that Black artists have been pushed into for some reasons that are performative and some reasons that are authentic. But I feel a community gelling, and I feel like the platforms and the resources and the support is allowing for something that feels very much like an age of Renaissance.
I agree. That's one of the really great things that's coming out of this time. And also the amount of colleagues that are new to me, new friends, new colleagues, new collaborations.
I guess I feel like, sadly, this is all new. And then maybe wonderfully also, this is all new, but it's on all sides of the equation.
Yeah.
So fine, if they hear the jazz, but they have to learn to actually listen.
Yeah.
At the moment, I think it's just new.
Yeah.
But new is exciting too.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
I want to ask you about something, and I think this is all connected with resources and platforms. This is a complicated thought. So, I work a lot with music of Black female composers who lived 100 years ago. Florence Price, Margaret Bonds, all these people who had no resources.
Right.
They had no copyists. I was reading this letter from Margaret Bonds where she's literally talking about sitting up around the kitchen table with friends, trying to help copy the scores. And now that's not the case for you, thankfully. So how does that feel when, it's all of a sudden out there and done and, very public?
Yeah, I think, I kind of just decided that, well, okay, first of all, you figure out the skills necessary to make it so that you play from top left to bottom right, and it works. The basic structure of the piece works. The basic ideas of what you're doing work. The pacing, hopefully some of those basic elements are there. And I think at some point I had to decide that was okay. And I think as composers, absolutely, we have to think of it that way, that it's an evolving thing. Because we're so used to a piece by a Mozart symphony. Was published, 200 and whatever years ago. And it's been in that condition for however many hundreds of years. These pieces are not in their final state. I mean, you got to think about how many versions and copyists and things worked to create those final versions of those symphonies,
Right.
I think, what's the Haydn symphony where they walk off one by one?
Oh, the Farewell Symphony.
The Farewell. I always wonder about that one.
Did they just give up?
I wonder if he stopped writing it at the end.
Yeah.
And he was like, you know what? Let's just call it the Farewell Symphony. Everyone will walk off stage. It'll be fine.
It's an effect.
And if I feel like coming back to it later, I will.
There's this poem by Rita Dove. So Rita Dove is, another person to look up to as so many things, a human being and an artist and somebody whose words have a lot of importance in the world. And there's this poem of hers that's been inspiring me for many years called Testimonial. I do a lot of work with kids around the core of this poem. So I want to share it with you. Back when everything was still to come, luck leaked out everywhere. I gave my promise to the world, and the world followed me here.
I feel like the promise is to keep moving in keep moving from a place of self-honor. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what got me here. And that's the thing that's going to keep things moving.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
With everything still to come.
With everything still to come.